month we meet. NatickFOSS, NatickFOSS.org will get you to our website. It's hosted nicely by the BLU, and we appreciate that. BLU, Boston Linux Unix User Group. That's been around a bit longer than we have. We started in 2011. All those present, raise your hands. I don't think I started quite as early as the two Millers. Hello.
Present in 2011 or present there?
In 2011.
Oh, yeah.
And I see a hand from Bob. Were you there in 2011?
Wait a minute, which there?
There at the earliest of the NatickFOSS meetings.
Oh, no, I wasn't here.
Okay, I'd like to remind everybody that once we do begin our discussions, it's best if those people who are not speaking mute their microphones and then turn them back on as they need to speak. That way we don't get feedback and somewhat disconcerting background noise. So right now I'm hearing only myself, and that, I suppose, is adequate. Okay, I'm going to switch to sharing as we usually do. I'm going to ask for a window and make it Firefox to share. And go to the agenda, which you now should all be able to see. I do see it. Now I have a technical question. Dennis, does this show up as a main focus for everybody in the recording, or are we generally going to see the multiple face screen?
So this will show up as the main focus.
Oh, good.
The streaming doesn't do the multiple faces, so if you're not showing a screen, it'll show whoever's talking generally.
That sounds very good to me. Okay, we have no newcomers aside from Bob, who wasn't here in 2011, so he's technically a newcomer, I suppose. But we will skip the FOSS introductory slide talk and go right into the FOSS news, if you don't mind, where we find that finally, after a few months, the long-term support has decided that Ubuntu can now go to 24.04 as we enter September. And that's not unusual because the long-term support tends to be the Ubuntu most stable operating system version, unlike the 24.10 October or the 25.10 when we get there. Those tend to be a little bit more edgy, and the long-term support, because it has 5 to 7 years of technical support from Canonical, people behind Ubuntu, they don't want you to have troubles that they can avoid by taking long-term view of things. And if you have 2204, as I still do, it's now offering the upgrade of the full system and not just the simple updates that come along on a regular basis with any of the Linux flavors that are out there. That's one of the nice things about Linux distributions. They tend to have a policy of providing you what they can on a regular and easy to install process, but the long-term support versions only come out every 2 years, and then they are allowed to go back to upgrade old versions after a few months of testing. And that's the whole process here that we have talked about many times in our meetings, even though many of our users do not use Ubuntu or any of its flavors at all. Speaking of flavors and the underlying Linux kernel, when we get to 24.10, Ubuntu is preparing to offer a much newer Linux kernel than is available in the long-term support. 6.10 will be available as part of the upgrade for those doing the interim upgrades at October dates. And if you are in that quick to update cycle, you'll be able to have a much newer kernel automatically than you would otherwise have. Anybody have comments on either of those Ubuntu moves? Well, I see
I have a
no.
comment, Helga.
Okay, Dick.
Which-
Go ahead.
Okay. Linux has three main trunks of flavors, plus a lot of independent ones. And of the three, Ubuntu uses Debian. So there's Linux and a Linux kernel. Then there's Debian operating system. And there's under that, building on it is Ubuntu and others. And a year or two ago, I think, we moved from Ubuntu to Linux Mint, which was building on Ubuntu, but it's not building on Ubuntu as much this year because Ubuntu is moving to its own snap method of sending you packaged software applications and such. There's a controversy of whether that's a plus or a minus, and we can use it with Linux Mint, but we're fed our choice rather than just that one special Ubuntu flavor of packages for new applications. So that's coming out almost immediately. It might have come out this morning. We've been locked in a computer doing other things, and we'll be busy for the rest of today and maybe most of tomorrow on other things. So I'm kind of hoping by late tomorrow or Saturday, also Linux Mint, in which case maybe we can add it to the list when it's available. We're recommending it. We think it's just a little nicer, but in all fairness, we haven't seen the latest Ubuntu. So,
okay, Bob, you wanted to add something?
Yes, about Mint. What Dick is alluding to is that Mint is about to undergo its own major upgrade to version 22 from version 21.
with the longest support time I've ever heard of.
That's nice.
How many years?
I think they're planning on 12 or 15 years for the major releases.
Good
12.
grief. That is amazing.
I may have to leave that for others to test.
I have a feeling that most people who are in a stable release wanting 12 years are corporate kinds of users. And I think it's a very wise move by some of these major distributions to offer that. Though I think most of us who are semi-casual have decided that either we will be the LTS every 2-year upgrade kind of people, or those who are in that faster to study mode will go with whatever 6-month or 8-month cycle their distribution offers to be along the cutting edge without being too bloody about it. And then there are a few who have that mindset that they want the edge. There's no doubt about it. But that's kind of a minority in the community, I suspect. Welcome, Jerry, by the way. Glad to see you. Okay, I'll head back to the agenda on my screen so that I can read it. All right, we have Tumblr, a blogging platform that's been around for a long time, has decided that technology underlying Tumblr is too different from the WordPress back end. And since the company that owns WordPress, the most popular blogging back end that's out there, as far as I know, Tumblr is going to be, has been purchased by the WordPress company, which is called Automatic, I think. The WordPress people decided that they'd be better served by having the back end underlying technology be the same for both blogging platforms. And 500 million blogs will technically change from Tumblr blogs to being Tumblr WordPress blogs, though I understand will not see any difference in the way they have a front end view of what they're writing, and none of the people visiting a blog will see any difference either. It'll just be easier to maintain and add features, as this article tells about. But moving 500 million blogs sounds like a challenge for any technology group. Fortunately, WordPress and the people behind it, Automatic, have a very good track record of providing good support to everybody, even if they are running their own versions of WordPress, or if they are using the company's WordPress.com version. Both get the same kind of support, even if not at the same level. Another good piece of news is that the German Sovereign Tech Fund is a government-sponsored or sponsoring agency that has decided that they are going to make a part of the money that they distribute go to open source maintainers, so that the software that the German government uses is as completely supported as they can make it without having it be some company that owns the software. And this goes together with some other things later in our topics, but this happens to be one of the initiatives that I think all governments should get involved in. Because if you're giving a company control over your software, the one you depend on every day, you don't know what's in it if it's a proprietary piece of software. If it's open source, your government technology people can examine it and make sure that it does just exactly what the government needs to be done and nothing more. So paying for that, keeping open source maintainers viable and above poverty level seems very logical to me. And I'm hoping more groups, more governments will take that view of the open source world. Anybody else have comments on that?
I do, Dick. And My thought is it's incredibly logical, but a lot of governments are essentially, for the major part, owned by corporations that want that. I'm interested that Germany is the first place I'm aware of to do this, and I hope it spreads. I predict that the US won't be the second or the third. And that's my election comment for today.
Thank you very much for keeping it gentle. Okay. On the other side of that concept, the former Twitter, now called X, has decided that it should sue those who advertise on Twitter because they stopped advertising on Twitter. I'm not sure I understand the logic of the suit, but it is part of the same kind of discussion as this sovereign tech fund. If somebody feels slighted, open source offers a path which we call forking that allows a person or a group to take a piece of software that exists and to make a new version that works the way they want it to, and not require suits and lawyers and extended delays as a result of no, I own it. No, you don't. No, yes, I do. No, that all is gone from the equation with open source maintenance, thankfully. Okay. Dick Miller brought up a Rust issue in the Linux kernel. The maintainer for the Rust components being developed in Linux kernel, that part of the operating system that addresses hardware, he decided to quit. And the question is, what will happen to Rust code that is trying to be part of the Linux kernel? Is that correct, Dick?
Well, this is Dick.
Yep.
I've decided to quit too, just on this one item. Several people told me they were much more involved with the Rust. I'm not. So although I brought this subject in, will other people comment on it? I know there were some good comments out there.
If I recall correctly, Jerry had a plan to has prepared a presentation about Rust and its value within the kernel. Jerry, do you think now would be a better time than waiting until you had it in the agenda later?
Well, I actually put it in the agenda last night. You
Right.
just didn't pick it up.
Oh, I think it's there. I think it's a little further down than this
Yeah.
item, that's all.
No, the item's there, but the link, I put the link in there.
I didn't
But-
catch the link. I'm sorry.
No
You're right.
problem. I can share my screen.
Let me unshare mine then. How's that?
Good.
Okay, stop sharing. Done. You're on, Jerry.
Okay. This is just a quick comparison between Rust and C and C++, and some of my opinions after. I did not know Rust until I looked at this. I knew they were doing Rust in the kernel, and I've read a lot of good points, some bad points. And basically, we go back to 1972 when Dennis Ritchie wrote the C language. The intent of C was to rewrite the whole Unix operating system with it. And C is a high-level language like COBOL, like Fortran, but it's actually a lower level language than almost every other high-level language. With C, you can directly address memory through pointers, and few other languages can actually do that. And again, this makes C very, very powerful, but potentially dangerous. You know, I don't want to really go into programming code for this audience, but Rust is strongly typed. That means an int is a 32-bit or a 64-bit int as you specify it, and it can't, the variable can't be anything else. In C, you can play games with it. Rust also provides a lot of performance, and you probably can match C and C++ with Rust, which is the important thing for the operating system. So you don't want to lose performance. Another thing, Rust doesn't have a garbage collector, meaning that if you have a pointer that references memory and you are no longer using it in that program, the memory is released. And I don't want to go into more specifics. Here's an example of C code and Rust code. These are just very simple hello world programs. And comments in Rust are the / followed by a comment, which is the same as C++ and C compiled with the C++ compiler. C had a slightly different type earlier, which was a /*, the comment ending with a /*. But most developers don't use that anymore. In C, you have to include header files to define your functions. But essentially, they're very same. You're defining a function, you're calling it a function, where in C, everything's a function. And instead of printf that they're using in C, it's this println, mainly that comes from Pascal and Java. But these essentially identical programs, they spit out the exact same thing. If you noticed down here in C, a printf does not automatically do a new line. So you actually have to physically put the new line in the code, whereas the println actually does the new line for you. An example, the examples are small. I can write several other programs in Rust if you want, which I'm probably going to do just to learn the language. But the language is essentially very similar to C and C++. Unlike Java, it does not force you to do. It does not force you to do object-oriented, but it does support object orientation if you want to use it. Python is the same way. If you want to code object-oriented, you can structure your code that way. Java requires you to, everything has to be object-oriented. And you can argue back and forth about it. But I like Rust, what I've seen about it, and the main thing is the memory protection. One time when I was working at Digital, I was the maintainer for lint, and we were linting the kernel, looking for bugs in the kernel. Rust compiler actually has an automatic lint feature, but Rust is very much like C, but it's got a few other things. When you define a variable, you have to say let to define a variable. But otherwise, it's much safer. And that's really what you want in the kernel. And I was starting to mention years ago when I was working at Digital, we were switching compilers. And one of the compiler guys sat next to me. And one of the programs I was responsible for was flagged. And I looked at it. No one's touched the program, had touched the program for 10 years. It's a standard Unix, Linux, a standard Unix program. It wasn't Linux. Well, on closer look, that program, while it hasn't had a problem in many years, it did have a potential bug in it. It had a buffer overflow that nobody looked at because it really never did that. I mean, it was an easy one-line fix, but compilers like that include lint can actually do checking and memory checking for you. So it's, I think, a good language for kernel use. Whether it will replace C or C++, I don't know. It depends a lot on some of the developers. I think I've seen that Linus instant prefer Rust.
Both of the languages are compiled as opposed to being interpreted, which is one of the things that those of us who are junior kinds of programmers don't fully appreciate.
Yeah.
Python is one of those that is interpreted, and that means you can write it and run it and write it and run it and write it and run it without doing extra steps. But if it compiles, you have to do that step, winding up with a much tighter, smaller package. And that's from a programming perspective, a little harder, but you wind up with a package that is much smaller to deliver, as I understand it.
Well, Python, a lot of Python and apps in the real world are compiled. If you look down at Python, you'll see .pyc files. Those are compiled Python. So you have an option. Python does an inline compile as it operates to make it faster and more efficient, but it also has a compiler that you can use to do that with. But everything you've said, though, is absolutely true about compiled language. And one of the real advantages of compiled language is the optimizations that they do. They can set up loops and make some assumptions about the loop, make the code a lot faster. And a lot of other things in the code that they do to optimize the code behind the scenes. And I've been bitten with Fortran that screwed up years ago.
Okay. As Jerry said, let's not get too technical in this area, but recognize that those who are making the Linux kernel are working to tighten code and add features and deal with new hardware requirements and make sure that the newest processors can use the Linux kernel and anything built on top of it efficiently and not run into problems because of mismatched typing and things of that sort. So if the maintainers of the Linux kernel begin to like Rust, it's probably a good thing for us out here in the user community, but we may not necessarily need to know the bloody details of making the change or incorporating the two together over time, C and Rust. There's always new languages coming out, so maybe there'll be a third party candidate at some point, and maybe we'll still be talking about the topic that far ahead of us.
Dick
Thank
had
you,
his
Terry.
hand up.
Okay, Dick, go ahead.
Okay, I had two passing thoughts that were like this issue, but different topics. And I thought I'd just put them out there for later conversations because they have me scratching my head. This is similar to what I lived through personally a long time ago. I was an electro-optical physicist back when big companies could afford to have a computer. And it took up a lot of space and a bunch of people feeding it. I was interested in learning how to program. But my big company with the big computer said, no, we don't want to encourage that for two reasons. One is the computer is too expensive by the hour for you to waste its time. And the second one is you are too expensive by the hour to have the computer waste your time. We've come a long way since then, but at the heart of this discussion, there's that kind of thinking too. How many people do you want to have access to that level of coding? Do you want to encourage easier coding out there or not? My second insight, I was wearing a t-shirt bragging about it a little while ago. Should have kept it on. Esperanto. Jill and I have both been fascinated with Esperanto. Jill put it to much more use than I did. But from about a century ago, it was a solution that Latin once was, that lingua franca became, and that English for a while was taking over for being the interculture language for communicating with that extra language that's universal, standard, obvious, simplified so it works better and so you can work it better. And Esperanto had all that done by a man named Zamenhof, and you can look it up. You can learn it today. You can get on internet groups using it today. And as an engineering feat, I think it worked out half of what programmers had to work out again later. How do you make it as common as possible, as understandable as possible, as predictable as possible, not four meanings for the same thing, and not four different ways of saying a word depending on the use you're putting it to. Perfectly predictable, an incredibly wonderful, and now unfortunately exotic language. They have a lot to do with this discussion, and I was at one of them. That's it. I'd love to get into details of other people on that at another time and place.
Thank you, Jerry, for the link.
Yes.
Okay.
You're welcome.
I guess it's time for me to reshare.
Yep. I stopped my share.
And this is the other half of the German sovereign tech. Government agencies and software copyright. This article very intriguingly suggests that any government agency should expect that they own the copyright as opposed to the software vendor owning the copyright, and that copyright therefore can be offered under good terms to any other government agency who wants to use it. And this is obviously very similar to open source concept, that no software company should be in the position to sell the same software to 7 different government agencies in the same government for a new fee. It's paid for by the government, developed for agency number 1, then agency number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and however many should all have access to the same software without having to go through hoops to get it, paying some company to do the work of adding a new feature should go out to all the agencies, not just to the one requesting. Whether that will happen depends on the government agencies and, as Dick said, the corporate sponsorship that seems to be involved in our politics these days. Was there a question out there? I heard a clearing of throat.
Yeah, I've done some government software, but I was under the impression that when you write code for the government, it was available to the public. It was at one time, I think.
I think that's like what we think of as the public domain nature of all the photos that are supplied by NASA.
Yeah.
That if you're giving credit to a private person, that's fine, the one who took the photo. But if NASA actually had the employees of a space agency take the photo, supply the photo to them, then that was going to be accessible by anybody without pay. And I think that we are all proponents of having the government develop software that is in the public domain and or open sourced, so that not just the government, but the people who, in our democratic society at least, the people who are the support for the government gain back that support from the government of the software that runs things. I don't think anybody in this group would argue with that idea. Dick?
No.
2 other quickies on that. First of all, FOSS, free open source software, comes with what's called a copy left. Pretty much removes the problem with what to do about the copyrights. And my second comment is in our agenda, just go up 3 lines. I think this is the German discussion taken from the opposite side. Just forget about it. Lose that copyright. I mentioned Esperanto earlier. Computers are now the way we talk to everyone but the closest people to us physically. Why don't we treat it the same way as Esperanto? Have free way to use it. If there's some special device or algorithm that's incredibly valuable for a product, do you tie it to the product or do you allow it to be used for other products? You can argue both ways. We're all arguing for open source. Copy to left.
All right.
I just want
yes.
to insert one thing, a non sequitur. I've been reading that the spacewalk recently from SpaceX apparently is breaking the law. Apparently some treaty goes back to the Cold War that restricts a private company from doing what they just did. And that's, well, actually Al Jazeera published it, but I've seen it elsewhere. So I just wanted to do a quick mention of it. I know that Bob was planning to take a trip to space.
All right. Thank you for these good comments. And that leads us up to the last of our FOSS news. There's always more, but this is the last item this time. Our part-time participant in these meetings, Laura M., has reminded us that Software Freedom Day is September 21st this year, just a week or so away. And on Saturday, she has decided to organize a virtual event since getting a physical one is difficult in the area where she lives. So she's proposing getting together on the meet of google.com as opposed to Jitsi that we currently use here on NatickFOSS, but it's the same concept, at 9:30 on Eastern Time Saturday morning, 2 hours, similar to our time here. Any interested parties are welcome to join in that virtual event that she is organizing. And I saw an email from Dick saying, should we participate? And I think the answer is feel free, do so. I'm not sure we need to be co-sponsor as saying that NatickFOSS is responsible for this, but that's up to this group. Do you think we need to be attempting to gain traction within that event?
My thought on it is we can support the activity by publicizing it, which we've just started doing. And so, tell your friends if they might be interested. And I think we can tell her that we've done that. If she isn't, she'll probably be listening to it later or is listening to it now. So, but we're not running it. I'm not suggesting we should, but we think it's one of many good ones. She provided a link for Software Freedom Day, which provides a link for where around the world people have announced meetings. Not a whole lot near us yet. I think our near one is Quebec City. So I think it's worth supporting it and seeing if we can help it get along a little better. And as for talking about your favorite FOSS software applications, etc., who doesn't like to talk about that and come home with a new one? Sounds like a good idea.
Good. And not need to drive to Quebec and use a passport. Okay, and we have some items in FOSS history. I was surprised how many I ran across between last August's meeting, or the most recent August's meeting, and this one. But WordStar has been a DOS program before Windows was Windows. WordStar 7, one of the later releases of it, has been released again as free and open source software, a maneuver we all support. Even if DOS is hard to come by on a machine these days, you can run FreeDOS. And a couple of items here talking about FreeDOS will point out that it is possible to even run it under the virtual system QEMU that makes running another operating system within Linux so that it emulates it. So if you are a WordStar user from way back and you want to bring in some of your old work that has been not available to you, WordStar is a way, WordStar 7 is a way you can now do that. And it turns out that there is a Canadian writer who used it all during his development of his novels. I've enjoyed his work, by the way. His name is here we go. Robert J. Sawyer, and if you haven't read any of his work, please do. He's a very good author with some very interesting ideas in science fiction, but he used WordPerfect to do, WordStar to write all of his early novels, maybe even some of the later ones. So if you are a fan, you can now go to it and use it. Any comments about old software of that sort? Have you used WordStar? I know we have one member who we haven't seen for a bit, Charlie Blaney, who may have used WordPerfect, or his wife used WordPerfect, and he was searching for ways to get it going. I don't think it was WordStar that he wanted, though. I thought of him when I saw this announced, though. And for people who are old Unix users, it is possible to use Linux as if it were Unix, and this article talks about a person who actually did that, and it's an interesting look back into history from before Linux was the popular version. Unix only offered command line experience, and author Jim Hall decided, hey, I'm going to try to use the current version of Linux as if it were Unix, and was actually quite surprised at how well he could do some of his work. Maybe not all of it, but a good deal of it. And two more items in the history. Dick has mentioned OpenStreetMap before, which is a community developed mapping system that competes with Google Maps, and in many cases surpasses what Google Maps can easily provide. Because if you want to put on layers of information OpenStreetMap is particularly well designed to allow people to layer on the locations of all sorts of things, like where all the fire hydrants are on a town map, or where all the bus stops are, where the train tracks used to run and now are paths. OpenStreetMap makes those wonderful. And it's been 20 years since the start of the project, just August 9th. We've just barely passed that. Congratulations to them for maintaining a great organization, allowing a 20-year development of an open source mapping system. And I heard some request. No, it was, I guess, something else, not part of our meeting. Okay. And finally, there is a fellow who is making an attempt to resurrect old programs and old games and old files of all different sorts. He's collecting obsolete data storage and seeing what he can actually pull off and resurrect successfully. And every Monday he's reporting on what he has found. And if you're interested in doing retro computing, you should be able to explore what he's found and benefit from it, because he's archiving the software so that it can be reused in the modern digital age, not fading to obsolescence on old decaying media. This is similar to the archives.org effort, but on a much smaller scale, I guess. This is also something like what Dennis has done with several games that he has resurrected to play on his arcade machine. Thank you, Dennis, for letting us watch that process too over the years. Okay. Anybody else have history notes to share with the group? All of us do have a lot of history. Looking at our faces on the Jitsi Meet screen, none of us are in our 20s anymore. That's too bad. We ought to have a few 20-year-olds in this group if we could find some.
I'd like to just make a comment on using Linux as if it were Unix, because I do that a lot. I'm an old Unix programmer, go back long before we had a GUI. And I use command line a lot. I log into the BLU server. That I do that all command line, although we have X running, but I never really use graphical when I do that. A lot of what I do is strictly command line. I find it's easy because I know, I've used the same commands for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all the commands in Linux are based on Unix. Well, they're all they mostly come from the Free Software Foundation.
And will be in use for years to come as well, because they are the underlying thing below the GUI. The command line is what actually operates much of what the GUI seems to do, because the GUI just calls the command line. All right. Wonderful, wonderful. We have the history all behind us.
Yeah, I just want to mention
in the future.
One thing you just
Jerry.
said. A lot of GUI programs used to just execute command lines and just run the command line and pump the information back. A lot of the CD software did that. Now they mostly use system calls at libraries to do that, but they used to do a lot of that. And you can write a GUI program if you need to do something GUI that's on the command line. You can write it, and it works out pretty well.
Good note. Thank you, Jerry. Okay. Hot software we already took care of with Jerry's presentation. Thank you very much. Yep. Hot hardware. The only thing I ran across this month that pushed its way into my consciousness was the concept of reduced instruction set computing, or as listed as RISC-V. I think that stands for 5, RISC-V. It works according to user Jeff Gearing, and he reviewed a new $115 motherboard to see how it could compare to an x86, which is the PC motherboard and CPU, or the ARM architecture, which are the typical phone and tablet computing architecture CPUs. RISC-V is attempting to make a third path that can handle doing in a similar way what the x86 and ARM have successfully done. But it's a little slow according to his assessment at this time. Is anybody in this group pushing for RISC-V? I thought it was worth a mention, but apparently we are not on that path yet. Okay, that's all right. Internet. We didn't talk while you were gone for those watching live. Okay. ICANN is the internet company that is responsible for domain name system rules that tells where you can connect with a name instead of just a series of numbers separated by periods. ICANN has apparently approved the domain name .internal in a way that can be used in DNS systems that are run within organizations, but it cannot be applied for part of a public network. In other words, it's not live for the internet, it's live only on an intra, one company, one building, one corporation, not for visible web use by the rest of us. But that apparently is something that has been valuable approval, because there are plenty of companies that want to be able to run their own networks, saving a lot of headaches because they're not going to be exposed to the public. If you do internal as your domain, then whatever you call your thing, IBM.internal or NatickFOSS.internal, would have to be run on your local area network, and only that way. That's kind of an interesting development and may be useful to a bunch of people. Probably not us, but there you go. Any comments about I can or I cannot?
One question. What does local area network mean in terms of a worldwide corporation that's on its own network?
I suspect that there are corporations that have wires that actually run from their corporate headquarters separate from the internet cabling that exists, and therefore a local area network might actually have several 100,000 hosts attached to it, and would be something that you could connect to between offices. Bob, you have a comment?
A lot of people think there's just one internet. There isn't. There are many internets, and they run in parallel. So you are correct about there being wiring that many transnational corporations have dedicated. Also, the stock exchanges have their own network, things of that nature.
And if they didn't want the public to see it, they could apply for stock exchange internal and have an easy way for their people to share information back and forth across their own wiring without having
Well, Algot, this is the very basis of arbitrage. It is not viewable by the public. It is internal,
right.
and it uses its own network.
So they probably have something like this already set up in their DNS systems, because they run their own DNS for their internal connections anyway. But now ICANN has made that official, perhaps.
Yeah, well, there are a number of IP addresses that are also private. 10 dot, many of us have a 10 dot address, which is local to our own LAN.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of other private IP address ranges that also are used. But another thing is you don't have to have a wire connected. You can set up a tunnel. So you're connected to the internet and you have an external internet.
That's good.
Like it did in Marlboro, we actually ran 3 different networks at our desks. We had the internet that we could go to. We had the company network, and we had a private network that could not physically connect to the internet. And we all had that and one big lab. And our customers could actually be given a phone number of a machine and actually dial in a machine and own that machine, and they couldn't get out onto our network. But when they're testing, for instance, when we got a new version of a DEC server or something like that, we'd put a bunch of them in our lab, and customers would be able to come into that, but they would be restricted once they're in there.
Does this
So that works nicely with that.
Does this apply the concept of VPN, virtual private networks? Is that what tunneling basically is?
VPN, yeah, it does tunneling. A lot of stuff that you're doing is you're tunneled, but you don't know it. But what a tunnel is essentially is a virtual connection between 2 points. And what a VPN does is you're tunneling to the VPN, and so your address is really hidden in the world, and you're somewhat protected.
Mm-hmm.
But that would we do it. Any large corporation is going to use tunnels or VPNs to connect between their sites. The only time you'd actually use a physical wire would be a lot of times in the government, when you're trying to connect connect systems, want to keep completely protected from the outside world.
Yeah, I
But
once heard
VPN is another name for a tunnel.
the only secure computer is one that's turned off.
Probably shielded in lead.
Yeah, in other words, not all tunnels are VPNs, but VPNs are a form of tunnel.
Does that
When
apply to the Ted Williams tunnel?
Well, it may have its own communication tunnel.
I wouldn't be surprised. Sorry about that. All right.
and essentially, if you use SSH, you're actually setting up a tunnel between your computer and the other computer that you're logging into. That does create an encrypted tunnel.
Mhm. As long as somebody doesn't figure out a way to figure out your keys.
Yep.
All right. Dick Miller has a demo, I think, of something called Text Fixer. Are you prepared to handle that now, Dick?
I'm not sure I want to get into the details of it. I think I can describe it. You've got
Okay.
a link where you can try it online live. The tools that I use for creating web pages didn't obviously have a tool I wanted. Uh, as some of you know, and you're all welcome to look, I have one of the many web pages called Money is Not Wealth. If you look for that in quotes and then add plus Miller, you'll find mine. Otherwise, it's a bit of a battle unless you know the address. But you can go online and find it. I have a lot of subjects under various categories, and for each subject line, I've taken to capitalizing the first letter of each word in that subject line. Just a style that helps you find where it is and where it isn't. And I've been doing that by hand because I haven't found a simple tool for doing it. I went looking at other people's reviews and recommendations. And the one that won in my early search was Text Fixer. It's got a lot of tools in it. One of them does just what I want. All I have to do is clipboard my line, bring up that address, scroll down to where it gives you the tool for capitalizing the first. I forget what they call it. It's not quite descriptive, but it's obvious after you can't find it the other way. Might just be capitalized line or something. It's something a little misleading, but it works fine. And you can put in that link instead of this link to get to just that one tool. Then you just paste your clipboard item into it, tell it to do the conversion. Back it comes exactly the way you asked for it. And you don't even have to copy it into clipboard. You can tap their box to copy it into your clipboard, and you've got it ready to slap in where you came from on your computer. It's lovely. They might have 100 other tools like that I'm not yet good at, but after you've used it 3 times, it's so stupid simple. I want to know why it isn't in my other tool, which in that particular case is Sea Monkey Composer from back when. Wonderful tool, and I can write to its maintainers and suggest this. And I reminded you about the program. You just reminded me to get that suggestion across to one of my favorite tools from back when. If you want that kind of solution for something else, start by looking in TextFixer. It seems to have an incredible number of that kind of solution.
I would like to add that I believe LibreOffice Writer has that function.
Yes, but a much more intricate, large, and just more obstinate. It's not as friendly by far if you've tried them both and got to know them both. And I was about to move everything over to LibreOffice, and then I thought a second time and asked online. There were a bunch of other solutions, but this seems to be the one at the top of the page for almost everybody. A discovery of mine, now a discovery for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dick.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just one thing about that. In LibreOffice Writer, trying to find a particular thing you want to do is a real treasure hunt. Whereas this one, it's all right there in one page.
Very much so. And on the other side, until you need one of these, Composer is an elegant, simplified version. And maybe we should look at that someday too, although it's old.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Anytime you make a proposal, we'll consider it. This is, after all, a group effort. And for data, another labor of interest for one person may turn out to be useful if you are intrigued to know what the wastewater level of COVID virus is in your particular state. A person has written a very small robot style program in some code. He didn't mention what kind. And every Saturday, he uses that code to publish the wastewater levels of COVID virus, which might make you want to go to a particular place or avoid going to a particular place. Here we're looking at the one from last Saturday, and then below it, the one from August 31st. And I don't think I want to go to Louisiana today anyway because of the tropical storm smashing in there. But Louisiana does have a very high level of wastewater virus identified. Where there is only a moderate level, Michigan, Hawaii, Montana. You have to know these as state abbreviations so that it doesn't take up too much space on the screen. And it also might be interesting to note that nobody collects the wastewater information for Arizona, for Guam, for North Dakota, or for the Virgin Islands. So who knows what's going on in those places. But every week, if you're interested in saying, well, I'm headed to Rhode Island, do I want to go? Well, maybe, maybe not. I'm in Massachusetts. Well, that's all the same anyway.
Avoid the Washington Bridge.
Avoid the Washington Bridge.
We call this the poop report.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
Actually, I think there is data for those areas in data reports that I get. I've been the executive director of the Lake Cochituate Watershed Association for about 35 years, stopped fairly recently, and I still get the most interesting of the attachments that I had back then. And there's a person who's taken on the job of vetting all the government data to do with pollution and making it publicly available to groups that want to know or to compare what their problem is, who has solutions to similar levels of problem, etc.
Mhm.
And one of those clearinghouses is just excellent. And I'm sure COVID is on the list, along with just about every other parameter you can imagine. And Google Maps is not the one that's the easiest one to put those overlays onto.
Google Maps? No.
Is
what?
not
Oh,
the
no.
easiest one. It's the open source one, OpenStreetMap. And there's some other things at different levels. So I think there's a lot that this could be folded in with. Damn, I have to send another message. Okay. It will help.
What's interesting to me is the desire by individuals to share the work that they do. I know that this group is that kind of group full of people wanting to share what they know. And out in the internet wilds, we have people like this person, Waldo Jaquith, and he felt this was worth knowing himself. So he decided, well, why not use my skills to make it available to the public? And that's what he's done. Okay. There's a fellow named Brecht de Root. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who has written a thorough discussion about what cascading style sheets are doing as a web tool. Cascading style sheets are used in writing web pages. There is no style sheet for the web page you are seeing now. It's just the way Firefox takes code from a written HTML, that's the code of the text, and just presents it. There's no fanciness going on. But if you are a web designer, one of the things you need to practice with is cascading style sheets. And we've talked about them briefly in the past, but it's a constantly changing landscape. And the last full version was style sheet version 3. There has not been a style sheet version 4, may never be. There's not a version 5. It's just been growing, changing. It's hard to know when to put down a marker. And this one person has decided that, well, he's going to put down some markers at least so that the discussion has some comparison points that can be made. And if you're interested in web design, that's what you would like to read about. The rest of you, don't bother. It's all right. Okay. Bob Premack has a set of links here to talk about artificial intelligence that is very negative. So take it away, Bob.
Well, I just simply let me get my entire screen up here.
Let me unshare then briefly.
Okay,
Okay.
Are we seeing my whole screen? Yes. And
Yes.
what I will do is minimize you guys and maximize my other browser view and get these guys up. What happened was, let's start at the beginning. I was just looking over a report on a cyber attack, happened to be ransomware, and it brought me to a link which was about AI and about some of these uses and misuses of it. It mentioned the same attack, and there was something about private equity and its role in making this particular company vulnerable, because they consider IT to be a cost center, and they were not investing money in it, and their security lapsed. And it cost some car dealerships a large amount of money and lost customers and huge amounts of delays in getting service or sales. Well, anyway, there is a book called Barbarians at the Gate, which I haven't read the whole thing, but it sounds like it's a very interesting read about how this kind of takeover by equity investors has impacted American businesses. And this guy referenced a fellow who's really tired of hearing the hype about AI. And so he's saying that it's not living up to expectations, and it probably never will. And the field has a lot of out and out academic and marketing fraud going on. Where have we heard this before? Cryptocurrency. Anyway, so one of the links in this rant, which by the way makes very interesting reading, led to an example of where AI was downright dangerous in what it was doing. One of these chatbots, Google Gemini, and this has probably been fixed since then. Google Gemini often will summarize recipes that it finds online. And this guy asked Gemini, how would I make garlic infused oil for cooking and for culinary use? And Gemini found instructions which involved putting the garlic and the oil in a mason jar and setting it out at room temperature for a few days. Unfortunately, Gemini skipped over something very important. You have to heat the ingredients to a certain temperature, because garlic harbors the organism that makes botulism. And in 3 to 4 days, this guy, following the Gemini instructions, had what looked like little carbonation bubbles rising in his oil. It turned out that if he and his family had used this garlic infused oil, they could have been killed by it. It had botulism in it, apparently. And so that was one of these strange things about what can happen when you have links that lead various places, and you never know where you're going to end up. And it's also a cautionary tale. Don't take chatbot outputs and instructions and recipes. Don't take them too literally without checking either the internal references or making your own search. AI should not be used in place of search for this and other reasons.
All right. Good advice. Good advice.
I have a comment on that because I've made sauerkraut, which is similar process, except that you don't use oil, you use salt and cabbage and smush it together, and then it does produce carbonation. It has nothing to do with botulism. So I'm not sure. After listening to that, I would go and do my own double check on it, just to make sure that that there wasn't some other explanation for the carbonation bubbles.
It depends on what you are actually putting out. It is true that in many cultures, cabbage has been fermented for centuries with no problems. There are two reasons.
Zoom sheet.
One of the biggest reasons is is the acid level. As it ferments, cabbage produces a high amount of acid, and acid tends to kill off microorganisms. So that is one of the things that happens. And so a particular kind of microorganism will survive in the acid, and it's usually a fairly safe one. Lactobacillus is the same way for yogurt, and that's been safe for centuries, millennia. It's just garlic and olive oil don't have that acid, and so you have a greater potential for things like botulism to happen.
Go ahead, Arnie.
Yes, I think salt.
Comments?
Arnie's attempting, but his microphone's a little soft.
Oh, maybe I'm not aiming right. The salt is a major contributor to preventing botulism, preservative.
Salt is a very good preservative.
Every cooking, last time I ever went to wild mushrooms, going to do anything with them, they needed to be boiled first. Because they can't be trusted. They're going to cook right away.
I missed most of that last comment, Arnie.
Any mushroom plants I've been to, cooking, always recommended cooking before using, or using them in something where the heat is going to be above the boil as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Very wise.
The heating, in order to avoid botulism, has to happen before the canning, before putting on the lid, because once the toxin is produced, it is not destroyed by heat. But no, the carbonation bubbles are not by themselves an indication, but in this particular recipe, it's not supposed to produce them. And if it does, you are at risk.
I'd like to add two thoughts. One, there's truth, there's lies. Sorry. There's truth, there's fiction, there are lies, and there are damned lies. And they can overlap some. But, Bob, your talk with a very few word changes is totally appropriate for the upcoming presidential election.
Yeah.
Think
Be
about
careful.
it.
Be careful what you listen to and be careful what you believe.
And AI has made it so quick and easy and out of control to generate problems.
Oh, yeah.
Spectacular.
Taylor Swift.
Well,
Trump had a Taylor Swift endorsing him in an AI.
Oh, right.
yeah, but she actually did do the endorsement of.
The other way.
Well,
of,
she's endorsed Harris.
Yes,
Right.
of Harris. That has happened.
Awesome. All right. Back to sharing again. Let me bring up that option. Window, Mozilla, share. I'm getting good at this.
Yes.
Buttons. That's good news. Georgia voter registration had a vulnerability. Fortunately, before the article was published, the vulnerability was fixed. Turned out anybody could log in to any person's name, give minor information about the person, and unregister themselves or unregister the person they were pretending to be. So we have issues of computer security that we need to know about. And I don't know if any of you have used a YubiKey, which is designed, I believe, to validate who you are.
I have one right here.
All right.
Let me show you.
every single one of them has the same vulnerability.
Can you see it?
I'm not. Well, I see
I
only a
can
helicopter.
share. I took a picture of it, so I have it. But
But Algot has to
I have a
unshare.
UV key right here. I'll just let me see if I'll just select myself so I can see myself.
There you
There's a
go.
UV key right here.
Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to validate who you are while you're using the computer, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Turns
we
out
use the
that
Red Hat all the time.
every single one of them is flawed in some way that can be detected. And of course, you have to have good skills, and you have to have about $11,000 worth of equipment at hand. But the note exists that those people who are state actors could apparently bypass your identity verification because it's hard coded directly into every single YubiKey chip. Like many of the problems that we have, they're not software. When they're hardware, they're baked in, and the only way to correct it is to lock down some features to prevent the hardware from being accessed, and that, of course, poses its own problems as well. Too bad. I have $11,000 to spare, by the way, so don't worry about me.
Yeah, the main thing is when you have something like a YubiKey, you can't allow a firmware flash because that would defeat some of the security. So you would have to
Right.
get a new device in order to upgrade the firmware. UB has released new versions of the software. It's still called version 5, but it's higher than 5.7.
Oh, we have people who know more about this than I did.
Well, I looked it up.
That's natural.
And I looked it up and I looked through all the info I could find on it. And yes, UB's response to this is they have upgraded firmware. The trouble is people have keys drifting around all over, and companies are very slow to cycle out the bad ones and cycle in new ones. It's an expense. It's a cost center.
Definitely. Okay. There's a whole row here of things, a column of things about artificial intelligence, which most of the people in this group don't sound like we approve much of. Linus Torvald also doesn't have all that much faith in AI, as this article suggests, but beware if you follow the link. I'm not going to go to it now. The ZDNet website has so many popover and screen shifting ads that I found it very difficult to read the article, but it's the only place I could find that information about his reaction, which I believe was negative overall. And on a more interesting note, somebody decided to actually check out what people are actually using AI to to solve. These are some of the things people asked, and it's popping over. They draft our work emails and help us brainstorm ideas. This is ChatGPT kinds of things, and help you write your great American novel. But these are the kinds of things people do, and I found it kind of interesting to look at the spread of topics creative writing and role play, where probably there's no harm except maybe you ask it to write a major American novel and it does the whole job for you. I don't think that's very helpful. Homework help, search and other inquiries. That's becoming very popular apparently. For work and business, coding. I've talked to my son about it. He says they do it all the time in his coding work, and he's happy with it. But I find it difficult to believe that it's doing a good job. Somebody else that I trust very much says the code he sees generated by AI is so unreliable in his experience that it requires more time to troubleshoot and to verify than if the code had been written by a person who knew what they were doing. So it's those people who are generally too lazy to write good code who want to write adequate code with limited success, and the corporation maybe doesn't care that much as long as it does a good job for the first 6 months. Who cares if it's flawed? We'll dump it for the next version, and on and on and on and on we go. Job seeking down there at the very bottom. Not too many people use AI for that. Anybody here an AI specialist? That's good. I don't hear anybody saying me.
I'm the
All
only
right.
one here. Probably I've taken a course in AI.
You have?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the course?
Oh, I did. Dr. Hanneman out of BU. But that was 30 years ago.
Oh.
I'll add a comment. When I first moved to Boston, it was because a bunch of my friends had already moved to Boston, and one particular crowd were onto those inaccessible big computers, and a remarkable number of them were working at MIT with Marvin Minsky.
Yep.
And with a parallel group next door at Harvard. And they were majoring in AI. And I'm talking about maybe 70 years ago, for gosh sakes. It's a long time ago.
Absolutely.
They were dedicated to getting it to where it could get that good. Instead of transistors or massive printed circuits, we're talking vacuum tubes and teletype machines for input-output. And they were making progress back then. The hardware made progress that made the biggest differences.
Yeah,
I
there
don't
used
know
to be
any of
thinking
them.
machines, if you remember.
Pardon?
Used to be a company called Thinking Machines.
Yes, just one. And a few of our friends ended up out in California and other places at companies that were paying them very well for the same work. And a lot of them are gone, my friends, but a lot of them aren't. They all have the same take we've been having here. It's wonderful. It's one of the greatest magic tricks you've ever seen, and it's going to get more wonderful. But the misapplications of it are so deadly. And I'm talking literally in that term of that one little mistake with the oil recipe, and bigger mistakes in international trade of oil recipes, and bigger ones in terms of military solutions. And have we mentioned the presidential election and the reliability of the voting equipment? There's so many places it's really changing the game where it would be madmen to change the game in that direction. And it's getting increasingly hard for us to tell the difference. So I just thought I'd mention them instead of me and what.
To say nothing of the enormous amount of electricity that's used at the data centers.
Absolutely.
Well, they can report that differently too. Not a problem. At least it won't look like one.
Okay. Next on that list is an opinion by someone named Danny Alexis, who is an art person. AI won't make art, but it will put artists out of business, because if it looks good enough to the quick passing eye on an ad, who cares if it's actually artistic? The decisions made are corporate, not artistic individual application of this color or that shape. I recommend that if you have a sense of what art is about for yourself, that you read this and at least understand what Danny's point is. And then, if you want to try image generation software, here's an open source version of AI image generation software. I didn't even actually pursue that one. Just wanted to let you know it exists. And finally,
can I comment?
Yes, Dick, go ahead.
On both of those, I think AI makes pretty convincing art, and I want to point out that most talented artists have studied under other artists. They learn, and that's what AI is good at doing. It's also good at the fiction and the lying. Art has a lot of fiction in it, as opposed to just facts. And a lot of it follows easy rules. And it takes a long time for an artist to do what Photox, for example, does instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So these are going to Mike Cornelison, and he's the author of Photox. He's already got a bunch of tools for doing simple algorithms on images, and I use those on art to do interesting different kinds of art. And I think that there's software already out there doing pieces of it, including that one. But to me, the most interesting thing is in the last week, about a week ago, I discovered a Russian artist. I'll send in a couple of examples and you tell me. I've been doing what he's been doing using Photox, and I love what it looks like. So I don't believe this. I do believe the part where it'll be putting artists out of business. People who would have hired an artist will just take 10 shots of this, pick the one they like, copyright it, and use it. That's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. We all have our 2 cents, definitely. Okay, and in the FOSS fun section, the Free Software Foundation has published a bunch of printable stickers that if you're interested in talking about the Free Software Foundation itself, you can use this image to talk about it and to promote it. if you have other kinds of images you want, they have a whole series of available ones, and they are licensed under the GNU free documentation license of Creative Commons attribution share alike. So you have to tell where you got the sticker, that you didn't make it yourself. But there are other places that offer stickers. I just thought if you were interested, you might want to print something that included one of these. I particularly dislike digital rights or digital restriction management on things that are hard to transfer from one e-reader to another. Sometimes I want to read something that was first downloaded to one of my devices, and then it's hard to get it to another. And that makes my life a little bit less comfortable. I paid for it, but digital rights management prevents me from sharing it with myself in spite of my ownership. Ownership, yes. All right. In addition to that, we have a link for an open source job availability. I don't know if any of you are currently looking for jobs, but I thought it might be worth a mention here. If you go here and put your information in, they might be able to find you a job, apparently. But on the same note, I might mention that I got an email which was from something called the Kimball Group. The Kimball Group offered my name up and said, "We have a job offer for you at $265,000. And I thought, why would somebody want to hire a 78-year-old, pay him $65,000 to be an open source advocate? That's what the job description was. So I went looking online to find out more about the Kimball Group, and most sources that I found were university placement office sources, and they said Kimball Group is probably, almost certainly, some kind of scam. So watch out if you use it. I don't know if this is the same kind of thing, but it brought up the topic. So I thought, well, I'll present it at the September meeting of the NatickFOSS.org group. And here we are, arriving near 5 o'clock. And that typically means that we're at the end of this month's meeting. So I'd better mention that next month, our meeting is Natick Archives. This is the official page, by the way. It is up to date as much as possible, including today's agenda, September 12th today. We next meet in very short order on October 3rd. It's just a couple more weeks ahead of us, so it will be next month, but not quite a month away. So if you have good things for us to talk about, please do submit them. And those who are on the board will take time to go to the agenda page. This is how we enter our agenda items. And several different people have been responsible over the past months. We're about to get to the agenda of the October meeting. And as you might suspect, it's pretty empty right this minute because we used a lot of the stuff this week. If you have good items, put them in the agenda yourself if you're a board member, or pass the information along using the discuss mailing list. And if you have not yet signed up for our Discuss mailing list, go to our homepage, NatickFOSS user group, scroll down, find out about our Discuss mailing list in this section. Sign up for it. Right here, sign up. If you are a member and you need to change something about yourself, do it here at the adjustment page. You'll have to log in, so remember what your login is. And if you are a member of the group, send messages to discuss@natickfoss.org, and we will process the good information into next month's agenda or some agenda ahead of that. I personally want to thank everybody who, excuse me, who didn't clear their throat throughout the entire meeting and made so many very good comments for us to discuss. All the good items on the agenda were not all mine. I appreciate all the help in building the agenda that I can get. Any comments in closing, anybody? Bob?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you
You go
need
ahead.
me to send you, Alga, you need me to send you a link in my presentation? It should be, actually, I put it in your agenda, probably
I will
after
just,
you
I
published
will
yours.
just copy it over from the
Yep.
the place
Okay.
you add it.
Okay. If not, just send me an email.
Very good.
Big thanks, Algot and all.
Wait,
And
wasn't
Oh.
Bob going to say
oh, I
something?
thought you were going to
Yeah.
send it.
There was one thing that we have noted, and it applies to Miller Micro as well. About the 32 gigabyte Ventoy USB. Microsoft has added a USB blacklist in their latest Microsoft update. And Ventoy no longer boots with Secure Boot enabled. The Ventoy people need to do an upgrade in order to use a bootloader that's not blacklisted by Microsoft.
Whoa.
Do you have a specific recommended one?
I can't make the change because Ventoy uses a specialized bootloader and a specialized shim. They have modified it. I have tried the solutions that involve importing the shim and the bootloader from a working Linux distro, and it doesn't work with Ventoy.
I'm interested in what the difference is because we lean pretty heavily on Ventoy thumb drives and we've been updating.
I
We mostly
believe,
play with Mint, as you know.
I believe Ventoy has a custom boot grub and whatever else it is involved in that, and they may have a custom shim. They do have their own way of putting in the TPM key, but I don't think that's been changed by Microsoft.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And there are literally thousands of SE Linux USB boot ISOs which will no longer work because that boot method, that bootloader, got blacklisted under Secure Boot. The exact change is called the SBAT database. It's hard-coded into your UEFI BIOS.
Ouch.
It's in the CMOS list. And its database is called DBX.
So could you
I'm
send
looking
us
forward to a link on that.
I could send a link about SBAT.
That's good. Or actually send that link to the discuss list, but also see if we can add that in for next month in the October agenda.
One moment. Yeah, I will look this up. I almost have it here.
So do you think this is because, I mean, that Microsoft did, let me start again. Do you think that Microsoft used their, we're going to get into Linux stuff to figure this out?
I think what happened was there is a security vulnerability. It does affect older grubs and older shims. And it could lead to some serious firmware infections. So it's not malicious on Microsoft's part. It's just that the open source community has not responded to the vulnerability, because you'd have to be physically present at the machine to exploit the vulnerability.
My gut question is, has Elon Musk just bought Ventoy?
No. If he had, it would still boot. Or if Canonical owned it, it would still boot.
Thank you. Thank you. Good meeting.
Thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you in October.
See you in October.
We're on September 21st, 9:30
Or,
to 11:30.
that's right. Thank you. September 21st, Software Freedom Day.
Okay, and I'll get those links.
Thank you very much.